I still remember the day my father called his black servant into his office. That ordinary-sounding moment would forever change everything I thought I knew about my family, about desire, and about myself. My name is Ethan Coleman, and at 22, I had just returned home after finishing my last semester at college. The house felt as suffocating as ever, immaculate, silent, and heavy with unspoken rules. Our family had always prided itself on appearances. My father, Mr. Richard Coleman, was a tall, commanding man whose sharp suits and sharper words left no room for softness. My mother, Grace, moved quietly through the halls, her presence elegant but distant. In our house, politeness was expected, obedience was enforced, and emotions were rarely acknowledged. Yet, beneath that controlled surface, I had begun to notice cracks, small moments that hinted at something more complex than the life my parents demanded. David had joined our household only a few weeks before that fateful afternoon. He was 26, with a quiet dignity that set him apart from the other servants my family had employed over the years. Unlike them, David moved through our halls with calm confidence, speaking only when necessary, yet somehow commanding attention with his presence alone. The first time I saw him, he was polishing the grand staircase railing, and I found myself unconsciously watching his hands, strong, precise, careful. There was a rhythm to the way he worked that I couldn't ignore. From the start, David seemed aware of the boundaries he had to respect, yet he carried an aura that defied them. He was attentive without being obsequious, polite without being timid. Something about his silence suggested stories and experiences I could only imagine. I found myself drawn to him, though I didn't fully understand why. It was a warm afternoon when my father called David into his office. I happened to be walking past the heavy oak door and caught the words from the hallway. "David, step inside. I need to speak with you." That simple command felt like a spark in a room full of dust. I paused, curiosity prickling at the edges of my mind. Something in my chest tightened, an instinct telling me that this conversation was not ordinary. After that day, the house began to feel different. Even the air seemed charged, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves were aware that something new had entered our lives. My father's office, which had always been a place of order and authority, now seemed like a stage on which invisible tensions played out. David emerged later, composed as always, but I noticed a subtle shift, a quiet weight in his expression that hadn't been there before. I began to observe him more carefully. The way he moved through the kitchen, the way he arranged the silverware, even the way he carried himself on the veranda, it all seemed imbued with a quiet magnetism. Each glance felt loaded with meaning I wasn't supposed to decipher, each polite nod or smile an invitation I wasn't supposed to accept. Yet I couldn't stop noticing. My thoughts kept returning to him, and a small, unacknowledged thrill followed me through the house. Even my father seemed unaware of the tension brewing in his own home. His attention was focused on business, on appearances, on keeping everything and everyone in line. But I sensed the world had subtly shifted, and I was standing at the center of a storm I couldn't yet name. That afternoon planted a seed, one that would grow in the shadows of my heart, quietly and inexorably, until nothing would be the same. And so, I watched. I waited. And I realized that the moment my father called David into his office, something had shifted irreversibly. Everything I thought I understood about control, about desire, and about forbidden attraction had begun to change, and I could feel the first stirrings of a story that would not end quietly. In the days that followed, silence became Ethan's constant companion. He spoke when necessary, smiled when expected, but inside, something had fractured. The guilt lingered, not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. The memory of Malik's words replayed endlessly, weaving itself into every quiet moment he shared with Ryan. Ryan, ever perceptive, began to notice the change. At first, he brushed it off as exhaustion, but the distance between them was growing, subtle, but steady. Conversations felt rehearsed, their laughter delayed, their mornings heavier with unspoken questions. Ethan tried to bridge it with small gestures, making coffee first, texting during lunch, but sincerity can't be forced when the heart is divided. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, Ethan sat at his desk staring at a blank sketchpad. His pencil hovered, but no design came. Instead, words spilled from him, raw and unfiltered. I met someone who made me feel seen again. I didn't cross the line, but maybe I wanted to. Maybe that's worse. He closed the journal quickly, ashamed of the confession even in ink. When Ryan entered the room, Ethan's heart stumbled. "You're quiet these days," Ryan said, leaning against the doorway. His tone wasn't accusatory, just weary. "Did something happen while I was gone?" Ethan forced a smile. "No, just work. Deadlines." Ryan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "I know," Ethan whispered. But the words sat like stones in his throat. That night, sleep refused to come. Ethan lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of Ryan's breathing. He realized honesty had become a luxury he no longer felt worthy of. By morning, the weight of it was unbearable. He had to tell him, not for forgiveness, but to reclaim the truth he'd been avoiding, that he found Ryan in the kitchen, still half-dressed for work, pouring coffee. The scent filled the room, sharp and familiar. Ethan stood by the doorway, his voice trembling before it even began. "Ryan, there's something I need to tell you." Ryan turned, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong?" Ethan exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. "When you were away, I went to a party. I met someone there. Nothing happened, at least not the way it sounds, but I felt something I shouldn't have. I didn't mean for it to happen, and I can't stop thinking about it. About what it means." Silence followed, long and suffocating. Ryan set the cup down gently, his expression unreadable. "Are you saying you cheated?" Ethan shook his head quickly. "No. Not physically. But I think I betrayed you here." He placed a trembling hand over his heart. "And maybe that's just as real." Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. The disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than anger ever could. "You could have told me sooner," he said finally. "I don't care what you felt, I care that you hid it." Ethan swallowed hard. "I was scared you'd see me differently." "I do," Ryan said softly. "But maybe not in the way you think. I see someone who's lost, trying to find meaning outside of what he already has." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Then Ryan sighed, his tone gentler. "I need time, Ethan. I don't know what this means for us yet." Ethan nodded, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "I understand." That evening, Ethan wandered the city alone. He found himself near Malik's art studio, its windows glowing faintly under the streetlight. He hesitated before stepping closer. Malik was there, painting in silence, unaware of Ethan's presence. Ethan didn't enter. He just watched for a moment, realizing that some connections were meant only to awaken, not to stay. That he turned away and walked home under the soft drizzle, each step lighter than the last. The truth had cost him, but it had also freed him. When he reached the apartment, Ryan wasn't home yet. Ethan sat by the window, watching the rain gather on the glass, and whispered to himself, "Sometimes love isn't about who completes you, it's about who reminds you to stay honest, even when it hurts." Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, and Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash through him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he only knew that whatever came next, he would face it without pretending, because some nights change you forever, not by what you do, but by what you learn you're capable of feeling. The morning after our secret began, nothing outwardly changed, yet everything felt different. The hostel corridors echoed with the same noise, the cafeteria served the same lukewarm meals, and lectures dragged with their usual monotony. But beneath the surface of routine, I carried the knowledge of what Adrian and I had done, a secret so heavy it seemed to bend the air around me. Every glance between us risked exposure, every shared silence threatened to give us away. At first, Adrian acted as though nothing had happened. He greeted me with the same ease, laughed at the same jokes, and joined me at meals as if our lives had not been altered in the stillness of my room. But when we were alone, his mask slipped. His eyes lingered too long, his hand brushed mine too deliberately, his presence filling the small space with a tension that words could not dissolve, and then Michael arrived. His visit was unannounced, catching both of us off guard. I saw him for the first time in the hostel courtyard, a tall, bright-eyed young man with the kind of warmth that explained why Adrian had fallen for him in the first place. He carried a bouquet of cheap flowers, grinning as he spotted Adrian across the yard. They embraced, and I stood at a distance, invisible in the crowd, my chest hollowing at the sight. That evening, Adrian and Michael sat together in the mess hall, talking in low voices, shoulders pressed close. I forced myself not to stare, though every fiber of me burned with jealousy. Watching them was unbearable, not because of the affection they shared, but because I knew what Adrian had hidden from him. I was the secret between them, the fracture in their trust. Later, when Michael had left, I confronted Adrian in my room. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice raw. "What does any of this mean if you can smile at him as though nothing is wrong?" Adrian's expression hardened, then softened into something far more complicated. "I don't know," he admitted. "I love him, Daniel. I always have. But I can't deny what I feel when I'm with you. It's different, lighter, freer. You make me feel seen in ways he doesn't." His honesty cut deeper than any denial could have. I wanted to be enough, wanted to believe that what we shared could outweigh his history with Michael. Yet I knew, deep down, that I was a shadow in his story, not the light that I. In the days that followed, the distance between us grew. We still exchanged looks, still found excuses to linger near one another, but the intensity had dulled into something more fragile, edged with guilt. I began to realize that what we had built was not sustainable. Infidelity had given me a taste of what I craved, but it came poisoned with shame. The hostel no longer felt like home. The same walls that had once given us privacy now pressed in on me, suffocating with memories. I started spending more time in the library, avoiding the spaces where Adrian and I had once found comfort. He noticed, of course, but neither of us had the courage to name what was happening. Graduation arrived sooner than I expected. On the last night in the hostel, Adrian and I stood together in the dim corridor between our two rooms, the air thick with unspoken words. He reached for my hand, holding it tightly, as though trying to etch the memory into his skin. "I don't regret us," he whispered. "Even if I should." Neither did I, though regret was tangled through my heart like ivy. I nodded, unable to speak, and then let his hand slip from mine. That was the last night we stood together in that way. Years later, I still think of those rooms, two separate spaces side by side, divided by walls that could not contain what grew between us. I remember the laughter, the confessions, the storm, the kiss, and the choices that followed. And I remember the lesson, carved deep and enduring: desire may burn bright in secrecy, but it cannot sustain itself without truth. In the end, we both had a separate room in the hostel, but in crossing into each other's, we lost the room in our hearts for honesty.